Major Eli Harper gripped the yoke of her F-15 Eagle, eyes scanning the endless stretch of Arizona desert beneath her. The sun had barely risen, painting the dunes in shades of molten gold and copper, but the radar ahead told a darker story. A sandstorm, sudden and violent, was rolling in faster than the forecast had predicted. She tightened her gloves, feeling the familiar hum of the aircraft thrumming through her palms. For 16 years, she had flown through storms, evaded missiles, and survived near-impossible maneuvers, but nothing in her experience could prepare her for the desert swallowing her whole. The storm hit with no warning. Visibility dropped to zero within seconds. She fought against the wind, her F-15 bucking like a wild stallion as she tried to maintain altitude. Every instrument flickered, some failing under the abrasive sand. Her comms crackled with static. "Harper, report your status," a voice called from the base, distorted and tense. She twisted the radio knob, her fingers stiff, but all she could manage was a weak, garbled response before the connection died completely. And then nothing. The world outside became a blinding haze of sand. The sun vanished behind the storm's roiling clouds. Eli's heart pounded. She knew the terrain below like the back of her hand, yet the familiar desert morphed into an alien wasteland. Her survival instincts screamed at her to eject, but something inside stopped her. There were lives depending on her, passengers flying in commercial jets along a corridor beneath her flight path, unaware that the storm above was about to descend upon them. And the thought of failing them, of being powerless to stop what could happen, ignited a fierce resolve in her chest. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Instruments failed one by one, leaving her blind to altitude, speed, and orientation. Her hands moved instinctively, guided by muscle memory honed over countless missions. Then a jolt. Something struck the fuselage. Sand, rock, she couldn't tell. The aircraft shuddered violently, alarms blaring inside the cockpit. She fought to steady the Eagle, her knuckles white against the yoke. She could hear her own breathing over the roar of the engines, sharp and ragged. And then, with a sound like metal tearing, her wings scraped a hidden ridge, sending the plane spinning. She fought to regain control, twisting the yoke, slamming pedals, but gravity was an unforgiving enemy. The desert approached faster than any simulation could have predicted. Heart in her throat, she calculated a crash trajectory, bracing for impact. Her last thought was a prayer, not for herself, but for the 183 souls she knew would be in danger if she didn't survive. Impact came with a deafening roar. The plane skidded across the sand, flames licking at the wings. The world became fire and smoke and metal, and then silence. Eli's eyes fluttered open to an alien sky, pale and jagged with streaks of dust. She was pinned by the twisted remains of her cockpit. Pain lanced through her side, every breath a battle. Yet she moved, testing limbs, counting them all. No broken bones, just exhaustion and abrasions. She struggled out of the wreckage, sand clinging to sweat-slicked skin. The F-15 was a mangled husk, a skeleton of what had once been her instrument of flight. And yet she was alive. The desert stretched endlessly, waves of sand shifting with the wind. There was no town, no road, no sign of immediate rescue. Every survival instinct screamed to move, to find shelter and water. But Eli's mind was already calculating her next steps. There were lives depending on her. The storm she had survived was moving toward a commercial flight corridor below. Hundreds of passengers could be in jeopardy if she didn't act. She limped toward the wreckage of a nearby comm relay she had spotted from the air. With fingers raw and bleeding, she dismantled parts of the tower, improvising a rudimentary transmitter. The electronics buzzed faintly, powered by jury-rigged solar panels. She transmitted a series of signals, coded but desperate, hoping that air traffic controllers or any nearby military units could decipher them in time. Hours passed. The sun blazed overhead and sank behind jagged dunes. Eli moved like a shadow, conserving strength, scavenging sparse desert shrubs for moisture, and marking her path. Each movement was calculated, measured. She knew that exhaustion could be lethal here, where hallucinations came as easily as the heat. Yet in her chest burned the fire of determination, an unyielding refusal to surrender to fate. Then a sound distant, faint, almost impossible to be real. An engine roar, her heart leapt. She ducked behind a ridge, scanning the horizon. Two F-22 Raptors descended through the storm clouds above, precision cutting through the chaos. Her breath caught. These were no ordinary aircraft. They were the elite, the top fighters in the Air Force. Her mind raced. Were they here to rescue her, or were they hunting a phantom intruder on radar? Every instinct screamed danger. She clutched the sand, eyes fixed on the shadowed forms of the jets as they circled above. One of them angled sharply, wings catching the sun in a flash. Eli froze, muscles tense, every nerve screaming. A wrong move could be fatal. Yet even in the face of death, she could not abandon her mission. Lives depended on her. She whispered a single word under her breath, more for herself than anyone else: focus. The Raptor above made a tight loop, scanning the dunes with military precision. Eli's pulse hammered in her ears. This was no simulation. No training could prepare her for this. She had to survive, she had to communicate, she had to warn the flights below, all while remaining invisible to the most advanced jets in the sky. The storm raged on, the desert unforgiving, and Eli Harper, officially missing and presumed dead by the military, rose silently among the dunes, a shadow of survival, a ghost in the sand. And somewhere beneath the chaos, the first of 183 lives depended on a lost pilot who refused to disappear. But even as she prepared to send the next transmission, her fingers trembling on the makeshift console, a sudden flare of light caught her eye, a reflection off metal in the distance. She froze. Was it debris, or had someone or something seen her? The desert waited, silent yet alive, as the question hung in the air. Was she truly alone, or was someone coming for her, and not to save her? The desert night was alive with menace. Sand whipped against Eli's face, stinging like tiny knives as she moved cautiously across the uneven terrain. Her legs ached from hours of climbing and scrambling over jagged dunes, but she forced herself onward. The F-15 was a wreck behind her, a skeletal reminder of death narrowly avoided. Every instinct told her to remain hidden, especially now, with the two F-22 Raptors still circling high above, scanning for threats. She couldn't tell if they were allies or hunters. She ducked behind a ridge, her pulse hammering in her ears. The distant roar of engines faded slightly, replaced by the whisper of shifting sand. Eli scanned the horizon through narrowed eyes. Nothing but dunes stretched endlessly, bathed in silver moonlight. The comms panel she had scavenged from the downed tower buzzed faintly, flickering in her hands. Her improvised transmission had a chance of reaching air traffic control, but it was tenuous, a fragile lifeline suspended in static. She closed her eyes briefly, steadying her breath. Every hour without water carved deeper into her body. Her lips cracked, tongue raw, yet her mind refused to yield to the desert's cruel pull. She had survived training missions that should have killed her, combat sorties over hostile skis, and maneuvers that tested the limits of both machine and human. But nothing tested her will like this. Invisible, stranded, hunted, or perhaps being observed, and knowing that far below, commercial airliners were flying blind into a storm she alone had the knowledge to navigate them through. Eli's hands shook as she adjusted the small antenna on her makeshift transmitter. She keyed in another signal, repeating a pattern she hoped would be understood. Every flicker of static on the screen was a heartbeat of hope. Then, in the distance, a shimmer of movement caught her eye. Reflexively, she flattened herself against the sand. Her stomach lurched. Could it be a desert scavenger, or something worse, another aircraft, another predator? She watched the glint of metal, silent as the desert night, heart hammering against her ribs. It's past. The shimmer remained, but no sound reached her ears. The desert could play tricks on the mind, conjuring shadows and mirages, but Eli knew this was real. Her fingers danced across the comms panel, sending a rapid sequence of coded pings. Somewhere, someone, anyone needed to hear them. The thought of the 183 passengers, hundreds of lives depending on her signal, propelled her forward. She refused to succumb to fear. She was a pilot. She was trained for impossible odds. And she was alive. A sudden crackle over the radio startled her. A voice, distant, distorted, urgent. "Unknown pilot, identify yourself." Eli froze. It was the F-22s. They had tracked her transmissions. The voice was cold, precise, professional. "I'm Major Eliza Harper." She hesitated, swallowing the desert dust choking her throat. "I'm lost, but I have critical intel for the commercial flights below. Lives are at risk. Please do not engage." Silence. The static crackled, punctuated only by the distant howl of the desert wind. She held her breath. Seconds stretched into a minute. The raptor above banked, wings slicing the moonlight. She had no cover in the open desert, no weapon, nothing but wit and the frail hope that the pilots above would understand. Then unexpectedly one of the jets tilted slightly, as if acknowledging her presence but still cautious. Eli exhaled slowly, muscles relaxing for the first time in hours. There was no time to celebrate. Every second counted. The storm she had survived was now barreling toward the commercial flight corridor. Without guidance, the passenger jets would enter turbulence strong enough to tear them from the sky. She couldn't allow that. Her fingers danced over the panel again, sending altitude adjustments, weather warnings, and vector coordinates. Her makeshift signals jumped from static into something comprehensible, guiding each flight like a spectral hand reaching through chaos. A commercial airliner blipped on her screen, its trajectory dangerously close to a sandstorm updraft. Heart hammering, she calculated a detour, sending the correction through her improvised network. The plane responded, veering slightly, guided by an unseen pilot whose presence they could not comprehend. As she worked, exhaustion threatened to drag her down. Her muscles trembled, thirst gnawed at her insides, and the cold desert night cut through her sweat-soaked clothes. Yet each successful maneuver, each corrected flight path, fueled her determination. One after another, the planes adjusted, narrowly avoiding disaster. The desert became a theater of shadows and lights, with Eli at its center, an invisible guardian orchestrating salvation from the sand. A sudden glimmer caught her eye, another shimmer of metal moving closer this time. Eli's heart skipped. The F-22s or something else. She ducked instinctively, breath shallow, every muscle tensed, every instinct alert. She had survived storms, crashes, and combat, but the unknown held a terror all its own. She whispered a single word, a mantra to steady herself. Wraith. Hours blurred. The night dragged on, and the commercial corridor below became a testament to her silent heroism. Radar feeds would later show unexplained course corrections, pilots describing a ghostly hand steering them through turbulence. But Eli could not pause to savor the success. She was still in the desert, still vulnerable, still hunted. The F-22s continued to circle, engines a distant rumble like predators in the darkness. She could see their lights piercing the night occasionally, scanning, analyzing, searching. Then something unexpected, a low, metallic roar from behind a dune. Eli froze, eyes darting, footsteps, machinery. She gripped the sand, straining her ears. The sound drew closer, then vanished as abruptly as it appeared. Her mind raced. The desert had its secrets, bandits, scavengers, wildlife. But in the back of her mind, a chilling possibility gnawed at her. Someone or something had noticed her, and it might not be friendly. Despite the fear, Eli refused to retreat. She climbed a ridge for vantage, scanning the horizon. The F-22s moved into formation above, and a flicker of understanding passed through her. They weren't just searching, they were testing. She would have to prove herself, survive their scrutiny, and continue her mission. The desert had become a chessboard, and she was a lone player against invisible opponents. Sweat stung her eyes, muscles screamed, but determination anchored her. She keyed the comms panel again, sending a final warning sequence for the night, ensuring the last of the flights would pass safely through the corridor. Her eyes flicked to the horizon, to the faint shimmer of jet lights above. One misstep could be fatal. Yet, as the first streaks of dawn touched the dunes, she felt a spark of hope. Somewhere in the sky, 2 F-22s waited, watching, analyzing, ready to confront her. And somewhere below, lives hung in the balance, oblivious to the woman who refused to vanish, who moved like a shadow through the desert, a ghost among dunes, a pilot who would not be silenced. Then the signal from the F-22s came again, sharp, insistent. Unknown pilot, prepare for interception. Do not attempt escape. Eli's stomach twisted. The time had come. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a target. And yet, as the shadow of the Raptors loomed above, she felt the pulse of adrenaline, the fire of defiance. She was alive, she was determined, and she would save the lives below, no matter the cost. The desert held its breath. And Eli Harper, lost to the world but not to destiny, prepared to confront the most dangerous flight of her life, an encounter that would define her legend. Eli's breath hitched as the F-22 Raptors cut through the desert twilight like predatory hawks. Their sleek silhouettes were lethal, moving with precision that made even seasoned pilots uneasy. She pressed herself against the ridge, sand grinding beneath her palms, the jury-rigged comm panel trembling in her hands. Every second counted. One misstep, one signal misinterpreted, and she would become a ghost in the desert forever. Her eyes darted to the distant lights of commercial airliners, tiny blips against the vast darkness. She could feel the danger radiating from each vessel, the turbulence ahead, the storm rolling in like an invisible wall of destruction. Hundreds of lives hung in the balance, and only she had the vantage, the knowledge, and the skill to guide them through. Her fingers moved over the transmitter, sending vector corrections, altitude adjustments, and weather warnings. One aircraft, Flight 482, was dangerously close to a violent updraft created by the storm. The autopilot was struggling against sudden wind shear, and the passengers inside were oblivious to the danger above. Eli calculated a safe trajectory, her mind working faster than her aching body could move. She keyed in the adjustments, watching as the blip on the radar obediently shifted course. Heart hammering, she exhaled sharply, knowing that this small act might have just saved over 200 lives in that plane alone. The F-22s above shifted in formation. Their radar sweeps were precise, almost surgical. Eli's pulse raced. She didn't know if they believed her or if they were preparing to engage. She took a shallow breath and keyed the comm panel again. Major Harper, I repeat, I am lost, but the lives below are at risk. Please hold fire. I have intel critical to safe passage. Static, and then a crackle of acknowledgement. The lead Raptor tilted slightly, banking as if to observe her more closely. Relief surged through her for a fraction of a second before fear returned. The F-22s were not there to assist. They were there to assess, to test, to determine if she was friend or foe. Eli's mind shifted into survival mode. She had been trained for extreme situations, but this was unlike anything she had faced. She was a ghost, a lone pilot among the shadows, orchestrating life-saving maneuvers from a wrecked aircraft, with predators circling above and danger below. Her body trembled from exhaustion, her throat dry, her vision blurred from the relentless desert sun earlier, but she could not falter. The night dragged on. Every plane she guided through the corridor brought a mixture of hope and terror. Another aircraft, Flight 97, hit a pocket of turbulence strong enough to knock a person off their feet. Eli worked frantically, calculating wind shear, vector corrections, and alternate altitudes. Sweat dripped down her face as she keyed in the emergency signal, watching the blip respond. The passengers below remained unaware that an unseen hand was steering them clear of death. Above, the F-22s began to circle more aggressively. Eli could feel their presence, the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on her. Her hands shook as she adjusted the transmitter, sending more signals to the commercial flights. She realized that she had to act with almost supernatural precision. One wrong move could end not only her life, but the lives she was trying desperately to protect. Then from the darkness behind a nearby dune, a faint glimmer caught her eye. She froze. Footsteps, machinery, another aircraft, her breath quickened. Every nerve screamed danger, but she forced herself to focus. Survival instincts, training, and sheer willpower became her guides. She whispered to herself, a mantra repeated through hours of terror: focus, save them, survive. Suddenly, a distant rumble rose from the storm above. The commercial flights were entering the heart of it. Eli's heart leapt. She keyed the comm panel frantically, guiding the planes through sudden turbulence, engine stalls, and the invisible walls of sand and wind. Flight 482 made a sharp adjustment, barely clearing a violent updraft. Flight 97 leveled out, the autopilot struggling but following her instructions. And then a calm break, a voice, distorted but clear enough to make her freeze. "Unknown pilot, your actions have been noted. Identify yourself. Repeat, identify yourself or we engage." Eli's pulse raced. The F-22s were issuing an ultimatum. Her hands hovered over the panel, trembling as she calculated the risk. If she revealed herself too quickly, she could provoke them. Too late, and the commercial flights below could enter a deadly corridor. She took a deep breath, her lips dry and cracked, and replied, voice steady despite exhaustion. "I'm Major Eliza Harper. I've survived a crash in this desert, and I am guiding commercial flights to prevent disaster. I mean no harm. I am not armed." Silence. The static crackled, punctuated only by the desert wind and the faint hum of her transmitter. Her muscles tensed as the F-22s banked closer. One pilot, clearly the leader, seemed to hesitate. A pause in the air that stretched like eternity. Then one of the Raptors tilted its wings, moving into a formation that mirrored her position, a gesture, almost imperceptible, signaling acknowledgement rather than aggression. Relief surged briefly through her. She was still alive. She was still the unseen guardian of those lives below. But there was no time to celebrate. A new radar ping flashed across her jury-rigged console, another potential threat. A rogue drone, automated, its trajectory pointed directly at the commercial corridor. Eli's stomach churned. Her mission had grown more dangerous. She wasn't just a lost pilot anymore. She was a shield, a protector, and the only barrier between disaster and hundreds of innocent lives. Adrenaline surged through her veins, sharpening her senses. She pulled from the wreckage a few remaining components, old navigation instruments, spare wiring, and connected them to the transmitter, expanding her makeshift guidance system. Sweat and sand mixed on her skin, dripping into her eyes, but she ignored it. Every plane needed her. Every life counted. The rogue drone blipped closer. She calculated trajectories, altitude adjustments, wind vectors, and speed, all in a split second. Keying in the final sequence, she directed the drone toward a safe canyon where it would crash harmlessly into sand and rock, far from the commercial airliners. She held her breath as the drone obeyed, following her commands precisely. Then, with a muted explosion that lit the horizon, it was gone. Above, the F-22s adjusted formation, their pilots witnessing every move, astonishment plain in their movements. Eli's chest heaved. She had survived the desert, guided hundreds of lives, and deflected a deadly threat, all without firing a shot. She was exhausted beyond measure, dehydrated and in pain, but she was alive. As dawn began to break over the dunes, casting long shadows across the sand, Eli looked up at the F-22s circling above. The pilots had to be impressed. Recognition was inevitable. She had done what no one expected. She had become something more than a pilot, something almost mythical. A voice crackled through the comm once more. "Unknown pilot, this is extraordinary. You've saved lives, prepare for extraction. You are cleared." Eli exhaled, a mixture of relief and disbelief washing over her. But even as she prepared to meet the F-22s, a gnawing thought lingered. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a legend in the making, a shadow in the skis, a force neither fully understood nor fully seen. And from that moment, whispers would begin among the elite pilots. About a ghost in the desert, a savior in the shadows, a protector who appeared and vanished without warning. And somewhere in the stillness, Eli Harper felt it, a sense of destiny, of something far greater than herself. She was no longer lost. She was alive, yes, but more than that. She was becoming the Wraith. The early morning sun burned through the thinning desert haze, casting long shadows across the dunes. Eli Harper pressed herself against a jagged ridge, jury-rigged comm panel clutched in her hands, sweat and sand streaked across her face. Her heart raced as the distant hum of the F-22 Raptors grew louder, closer, sharper. They weren't just observing now. They were preparing to intercept, to confront, and possibly to engage. The desert, which had been her refuge and battlefield, now felt like a cage. The two F-22s cut through the sky with predatory precision, banking in tandem above her. Their wings glinted in the sunlight, missiles and radar systems gleaming like instruments of judgment. Eli's pulse surged, but she forced herself to stay calm. Years of combat training kicked in. She had survived worse than this. She had survived storms, enemy fire, and near-impossible missions. But this was different. There was no cover, no escape, no margin for error. A crackling voice cut through her comm system. "Unknown pilot, this is Raptor Lead. You are in restricted airspace. State your identity or we will engage." Eli's hands shook, but her voice was steady. "Major Eliza Harper, I'm lost in the desert after a crash. I'm unarmed and I am guiding commercial flights to prevent disaster. Please do not engage. I have critical information." There was a pause. The lead pilot's response came slowly, measured. "Major Harper, is it really you? Confirm your flight records and unit." "I'm the pilot previously declared MIA," she replied, the words tasting strange on her dry tongue. "I survived. I've been guiding airliners through a storm using improvised signals. Lives are at stake below." The F-22s shifted slightly in formation. One banked, sweeping a precise radar scan across the dunes. Eli pressed herself into the sand as the jet's shadow passed overhead like a steel leviathan. Her stomach knotted. She had no weapons, no backup, nothing but her ingenuity and sheer nerve. If they misread her, it could be fatal. She keyed the comm panel again, sending a final sequence of signals to the commercial flights below, ensuring their safe passage. Each flicker of radar blip responding to her instructions sent a small thrill of relief through her chest. Hundreds of lives depended on her. But now, her own survival was on the line. The lead F-22 dipped lower, circling as if to communicate visually. Eli squinted, catching the pilot's gaze through the cockpit glass. Recognition flickered across his eyes, astonishment, disbelief, and a cautious respect. But the Raptors were still a formidable threat. One wrong move, one misstep, and she could be destroyed before her mission was complete. Eli knew she had to act. She could not simply surrender to the Raptors. She needed a plan, quick, precise, audacious. Her fingers moved over the comm panel, sending erratic signals to confuse the radar locks of the F-22s, a risky maneuver that could either save her or draw immediate fire. The jets twisted in response, their sleek forms banking sharply, engines screaming, testing her moves. Her heart hammered as she calculated trajectories, not just for herself but for the drones and commercial flights still vulnerable below. Sweat dripped into her eyes, stinging, blurring her vision. Her body was screaming for rest, her muscles trembling, but her mind was razor-sharp. Every second counted. Every decision could be the difference between life and death for herself and for the 183 souls she had vowed to protect. Suddenly, one of the Raptors moved aggressively, forcing a near spin in Eli's control. She gritted her teeth, fighting the aircraft with every ounce of strength she had left. The jet's shadow fell over her like a steel blade, a warning or a test. Eli realized the lead pilot was probing her limits, seeing if she could handle the precision and composure required in the face of elite pilots. Then a flicker of understanding passed through her mind. The F-22s weren't here to destroy her. They were here to verify, to see if she could rise to the challenge. If she succeeded, she would not just survive, she would earn their respect. Her body ached, but determination blazed hotter than any desert sun. She keyed in a complex sequence of radar signals, guiding the Raptors away from the commercial corridor while simultaneously maintaining control of her own battered F-15. It was a delicate dance, a deadly ballet of machines and willpower. The F-22s followed her movements, testing, circling, analyzing every input. She felt like a chess player with only one piece remaining on the board, forced to outmaneuver grandmasters in real time. Minutes stretched like hours. Her eyes scanned every instrument, every flicker of radar, every movement in the sky. Sweat poured down her face, sand clung to her skin, and her lungs burned with every ragged breath. But she could not stop. Not now. Not when the lives below hung in the balance. Then came the breakthrough. The lead F-22 broke formation slightly, banking in a gesture of acknowledgement. Eli realized she had passed the first test. Their precision maneuvers, their calculated pressure had been a gauge of her ability. She had proved herself. Yet there was no time to celebrate. The commercial flights were still en route, and the desert storm threatened to surge again at any moment. She transmitted final course adjustments, breathing a little easier as the planes responded, guided by her unseen hand. Hundreds of lives now had a fighting chance, thanks to her ingenuity, courage, and refusal to succumb to the desert, the storm, or the F-22s above. The Raptors pulled into a formation that mirrored hers, a protective escort rather than a threat. She exhaled sharply, muscles relaxing slightly. The pilot's acknowledgement was clear. She had earned their respect, but the story was far from over. Her survival had become a legend in the making, a tale whispered among elite squadrons, of the lost pilot who appeared from the desert, a phantom among machines, orchestrating salvation with ingenuity and nerve. And yet, even in that moment of temporary reprieve, a new challenge emerged. A rogue unmanned drone, automated and lethal, had been detected, heading straight for a city below. The F-22 pilots, impressed but limited by protocol, could not intervene without risking civilian lives. The responsibility fell entirely on Eli. She clenched her jaw, grit mixing with resolve. Her makeshift transmitter was her only weapon. With trembling hands, she adjusted the settings, calculating trajectory corrections to divert the drone safely into a canyon where it would explode harmlessly. The seconds stretched painfully. Her eyes flicked to the F-22s above. They were watching, silent observers, ready to act if she failed. The drone obeyed her guidance, veering off course, and with a muted explosion detonated far from the city. Dust and debris rose into the air, illuminated by the morning sun. Eli's chest heaved. She had done it. She had survived the desert, guided hundreds of lives, and neutralized a threat without firing a single shot. The F-22s adjusted formation above, their pilots silently witnessing her ingenuity and courage. The lead pilot's voice finally crackled through the comms, tinged with awe. "Major Harper, extraordinary. You've done what no one could. Prepare for extraction. You are cleared." Eli nodded, sweat and sand clinging to her, body trembling with exhaustion. She had survived the impossible, earned the respect of the elite, and saved countless lives. Yet she felt it deep in her bones. This was only the beginning. Her disappearance, her survival, her silent heroism had transformed her. She was no longer just a pilot. She was becoming something more, a legend, a ghost in the sky, a protector known only as the Wraith. As the F-22s hovered, engines humming like steel guardians, Eli Harper felt the first true surge of hope. She had been lost, hunted, and tested, but she had endured. She had become the Wraith, a force unseen yet unforgettable, a shadow in the desert and a guardian of the skis. The desert, once a cage, now held the promise of a new destiny. And somewhere above, the F-22 pilots whispered among themselves, already passing along her legend. A ghost, a savior, a wraith who appeared in the desert, guided the lost, and vanished into myth. But Eli Harper knew this was far from over. The world had taken notice, silently, invisibly. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of military intelligence, her actions would ripple further than she could imagine. The wraith had arrived, and the skis would never be the same. The sun had fully risen over the desert, spilling molten light across the dunes, and casting long, shifting shadows over the wreckage of Eli Harper's F-15. She sat slumped against a jagged ridge, body trembling from exhaustion, dehydration, and sheer adrenaline. Her fingers still clutched the jury-rigged comm panel, now warm from hours of use, wires sparking faintly from the desert heat. She could hardly believe what had just occurred. Hundreds of lives had been saved beneath her, commercial airliners guided away from the storm by her improvised signals. A rogue drone had been neutralized with nothing but calculations, quick thinking, and courage. And above her, two F-22 Raptors had watched every maneuver, circling like silent judges, initially poised for destruction but now almost reverential. The lead pilot's voice finally came over the comm system, calm but unmistakably awed. "Major Harper, this is unbelievable. Your actions, I've never seen anything like it. You've saved lives that no one could have reached in time." Eli exhaled, a long, shaky breath, letting herself feel the tiniest spark of relief. Her body ached with every movement, muscles screaming, lungs burning, but she allowed herself a moment of acknowledgement. For months she had been declared MIA, officially lost to the military and the world. Families had mourned her as dead. Now she had not only survived but had become something far greater than herself, an unseen savior, a living legend. But even in the midst of awe, her mind was already calculating the next steps. The commercial corridor was clear, but there were lingering threats. The desert was unpredictable. Another storm could roll in at any moment. And she realized there were still unknown eyes watching, intelligence units, military analysts, perhaps even the press if her transmissions had been traced. Her survival and ingenuity had made her visible in ways she had not anticipated. The F-22s maintained their formation above, almost protective now. The pilots had clearly run every conceivable scenario through their heads, trying to reconcile what they had witnessed. One of them finally spoke, voice low and measured. "Harper, how did you manage to maintain comms, guide the flights, and manipulate that drone all at once? That was impossible." Eli offered a faint, weary smile. Improvisation, desperation, a little stubbornness. Her throat was dry, cracked from hours of yelling into the static, and her hands were covered in sand and minor abrasions. She brushed a hand over her brow, squinting at the F-22s above. "I didn't have a choice. Those people, those lives depended on me." The lead pilot's tone softened, almost reverent. "You've earned our respect, Harper. Not many survive what you've just done. Fewer still accomplish it with such precision and bravery. You're extraordinary." Eli's chest tightened. Praise from her peers, elite pilots who had trained and flown alongside her, was meaningful. But she didn't seek validation. She had survived and saved others because it was necessary, because she could not do otherwise. She had lived on instinct, on training, on willpower, and on sheer determination. Then, as if to underscore her surreal reality, the lead F-22 pilot made a call over the comm. "Raptor Wing, from this point forward, unofficially, call her Wraith." Eli froze at the word, a shiver running down her spine. Wraith. Invisible, untouchable, silent yet deadly. The code name encapsulated everything she had been in the desert night. A ghost, a guardian, a force unseen but decisive. She felt the weight of it settle over her. The F-22 pilots had recognized something beyond skill. They had recognized a presence, a legend in the making. For a moment she allowed herself to feel it. Awe, respect, recognition. She had been lost, declared dead, and now she was being honored in the most understated yet profound way possible by her peers in the skis, who understood the magnitude of what she had done without words or accolades. But the desert had no patience for celebration. Eli's attention returned to the dunes, scanning for threats, for hidden dangers. The storm had shifted direction slightly, and although the commercial corridor was now safe, the desert's unpredictability reminded her that survival was never guaranteed. The F-22s could only observe and escort. They could not solve every threat below. She moved carefully, inspecting the wreckage for anything she could salvage: a functional instrument, a water container, a solar panel to power the comms further. Every small advantage mattered. She knew the desert could be deadly, and her body, while resilient, could not endure neglect. Then came a radio transmission from the F-22s, unusually formal. "Harper, remain where you are. Extraction units are being dispatched. Do not attempt to move until confirmation." Eli nodded, though the pilots could not see her. Every nerve in her body was tense with anticipation. She had survived storms, drones, and elite pilots above her, but extraction, that was a different kind of vulnerability. She was exposed, unarmed, and alone. Every step would need to be calculated, silent, precise. Minutes passed like hours. The sun climbed higher, heat radiating off the sand in wavering waves. Eli could feel fatigue pressing down on her, every muscle screaming for rest, every step a test of endurance. Yet her mind remained sharp, calculating, alert. She could not afford to falter now, not when she was so close to safety. Finally, a distant hum reached her ears. Not the F-22s, something larger. Extraction. Military helicopters appeared on the horizon, blades cutting the air like knives, kicking up clouds of sand that shimmered in the morning light. Eli's pulse quickened, hope and anxiety intermingling. She moved carefully to the extraction point, signaling with a reflective panel she had found near the wreckage. The F-22s escorted the helicopters, a silent guard, their presence both reassuring and intimidating. As the choppers descended, Eli felt the weight of what she had endured, the hours in the desert, the improvisation, the life-or-death choices. She had survived, she had saved hundreds, and now the world above the desert recognized her not just as a pilot but as something more. A force, a legend, a ghost called Wraith. As she climbed into the helicopter, sand still clinging to her sweat-soaked uniform, she cast one last glance at the desert below. It had tested her, broken her, and yet forged her into something stronger, sharper, and unforgettable. The F-22s banked one last time in acknowledgement, the pilot's eyes unspoken praise etched in their movements. Eli leaned back in her seat, exhaustion threatening to overtake her, but a quiet smile touched her lips. She had survived the impossible. She had become the Wraith. And even as the helicopter lifted off, carrying her toward debriefings, medical checks, and the inevitable media storm, she knew this was only the beginning. Her disappearance, her survival, and her heroism had created a ripple far larger than she could yet comprehend. From this day forward, elite pilots whispered her name in awe, civilians unknowingly owed her their lives, and somewhere in the secret corridors of military intelligence, plans and strategies would shift because of her actions. Eli Harper, once declared lost, now returned as a legend. She had saved 183 lives. She had faced death, drones, and the scrutiny of elite F-22 pilots. And somewhere deep in her soul, she knew that the Wraith had only begun to make her mark on the skis. But as the helicopter carried her away from the desert, a lingering thought gnawed at her. Who else had noticed her actions? And would her legend draw not just respect, but danger, in ways she could not yet imagine? The Wraith had arrived, and the world, whether it knew it or not, would never forget her. The military debriefing room was sterile, cold, and buzzing with tension. Fluorescent lights reflected off polished floors, illuminating the rows of officers who had gathered to dissect the impossible. Major Eliza Harper, sand-streaked and fatigued, sat in a chair that felt far too rigid for her sore muscles. The hum of ventilation mixed with whispered speculation. She had expected questions, but not this level of scrutiny, not this weight of disbelief. Her actions had already begun to ripple through the corridors of command. Radar logs, flight paths, and the improvised signals she had sent through the desert were being analyzed in real time. Analysts muttered to each other, heads shaking, eyes wide. Somewhere in the data streams, she saw confirmation that every commercial flight she had guided made it safely to its destination. Hundreds of lives had been saved, and yet the military's interest was as much in her methods as in her survival. A senior officer stepped forward, crisp uniform, sharp eyes. "Major Harper, your actions are extraordinary, but we need clarity. How did you maintain comms after the crash? How did you manipulate the drone? And most importantly, how did you survive in the desert for so long?" Eli met his gaze steadily. Improvisation, training, and determination. I had no other choice. Lives depended on me. The room fell silent for a moment. It was the truth, plain and simple. There was no embellishment, no heroics beyond reality. Yet even in that simplicity, her brilliance was evident. The officers leaned forward, notebooks open, scribbling furiously. Every detail she provided was like a key unlocking a puzzle that had previously seemed unsolvable. Outside the debriefing room, the whispers had already begun. Pilots of the F-22s recounted her precision maneuvers, her ingenuity, and the calm authority with which she had directed life-saving operations. The name Wraith passed from mouth to mouth, a code whispered among those elite enough to understand its significance. The Wraith was no longer just a legend in the desert night. She was becoming a symbol, an inspiration, a shadow moving through the highest echelons of military aviation. Eli's mind, however, could not linger on accolades. There were still questions, real, dangerous ones. Who else had tracked her transmissions? Had intelligence agencies picked up the anomalies? And what of the rogue drone she had neutralized? Its origin remained unclear. Automated, yes, but its mission, its controller, its purpose, unknown. Every step of her survival had created ripples she could not yet trace. A calm officer approached, holding a tablet. "Major, radar logs from nearby installations confirm additional anomalies during your operations. Unknown aircraft, unidentified drones, some of which intersected your path. Do you have any intel on these?" Eli shook her head. "Nothing concrete, only that some of them were active while I was transmitting. Possibly automated responses, possibly reconnaissance. I don't know." The officer frowned. "We'll need to investigate. Your actions have saved lives, but they may also have triggered unforeseen consequences." Eli swallowed, nodding slowly. She understood. Her improvisation had been necessary, but it had not been without risk. Each life saved was a victory, yes, but in the shadows of intelligence, of secret operations and covert surveillance, her visibility could attract attention she was not prepared for. Her thoughts drifted back to the F-22 pilots. They had observed her not as a threat but as something extraordinary. She had passed their tests without knowing they were tests. Their acknowledgement, the code name Wraith, the silent respect, had shifted her reality. She was no longer just a pilot surviving against odds. She was a symbol, a myth in the making, even among the elite. And yet being a symbol came with a burden. She could feel it settling on her shoulders, heavier than any parachute, heavier than the F-15 fuselage that had almost been her coffin. Every decision, every movement, every broadcasted signal carried consequences far beyond the desert dunes. She could no longer simply disappear. To survive, she would have to be smarter, faster, and more vigilant than ever before. Her debriefing ended with a warning rather than congratulations. "Major Harper, you've done what few could imagine, but be aware, the world now knows your capabilities. The Wraith is no longer anonymous, and with recognition comes risk. Stay vigilant." Eli nodded, her jaw set. She knew the warning was not idle. The desert had tested her, yes, but the world beyond it would be far less forgiving. Allies, enemies, the curious, and the ambitious could all move against her. She had survived storms, drones, and F-22s, but this was a new battlefield. Days passed. Eli moved carefully between debriefings, medical checks, and logistical coordination. The world outside remained oblivious to the scale of her heroism. News of the mysterious ghost pilot saving hundreds spread slowly, filtered through media and military channels, but no one knew her face, her story, her truth. She remained Wraith, a shadow, a myth, untouchable yet profoundly present. Her legend began to grow quietly among elite squadrons. Pilots shared stories of her precision, her calm under pressure, her ability to manipulate complex systems with nothing but skill and determination. The Wraith was invoked in simulations, in briefings, and in whispered conversation, a benchmark, a standard, a phantom mentor. Yet even as respect and awe surrounded her, Eli felt the pull of responsibility. Lives had been saved, yes, but there were still unanswered questions. Who had deployed the drone? Was there more activity in the corridors of the skis she had monitored? And most importantly, who else might recognize her as a threat or as an asset? One evening, as she prepared to rest in a quiet military safehouse, Eli received a transmission, encrypted from an unknown source. The message was brief, almost cryptic. "Major Harper, your actions have been noted. We are impressed, but be aware, the Wraith is no longer hidden. You will be contacted, prepare." Eli's stomach tightened, her instincts flared. This was no routine debrief, no casual acknowledgement. Someone somewhere had noticed the Wraith, someone who understood what she could do, and if they were contacting her now, it could be either an ally or a threat. She leaned back against the wall, exhausted, mind racing. The desert had forged her, but the world beyond it would test her in ways the dunes never could. She had survived storms, drones, and the scrutiny of elite pilots. She had saved hundreds of lives. She had become the Wraith. But now, the Wraith had emerged into a larger, more dangerous arena. Allies, enemies, and unseen observers were waiting. The skis that had once been her battlefield were about to expand into a network of invisible threats, tests, and challenges far beyond the desert. Eli's fingers brushed against the side of her comm panel, worn and sparking from hours of use. She felt the weight of her new identity settle in. The Wraith was no longer just a survivor. She was a force, a symbol, and a target. And she understood deeply that her greatest challenges were yet to come. As she gazed out into the night, city lights flickering in the distance, she whispered to herself almost reverently, "Let them come. The Wraith is ready." The legend had begun, and the world, whether ready or not, would soon know the name. The Wraith had become more than a legend. She had become a ghost whispered among elite pilots and intelligence operatives. Everywhere she went, her actions were discussed in hushed tones. "Have you seen her in action?" they asked, eyes wide with awe. "They say the Wraith saved hundreds, neutralized threats, and never fired a single shot." Eli Harper moved among them, anonymous, unrecognized, yet every whispered word fueled her resolve. The desert had tested her. Now the world would. It began with the briefings. The military wanted to understand how she had achieved what seemed impossible. Her improvised comm systems, her rapid calculations, her calm under pressure, they were anomalies. Engineers analyzed her work, analysts dissected her signals, and pilots replayed her maneuvers again and again in simulators. Eli observed quietly, her mind always calculating, always anticipating. She had survived storms, drones, and F-22 scrutiny. Now she faced something even more insidious, scrutiny without trust. A message arrived, encrypted and untraceable, only a short line. "Wraith, we need you. Lives are at stake, time is critical, your skills are required." Eli's pulse quickened. She knew the sender was neither casual nor trivial. Every instinct screamed danger. Her anonymity, once a protective shield, had become a liability. Her every move could be watched, every signal traced, every misstep exploited. She packed lightly, taking only essentials, comm devices, survival gear, and the few tools salvaged from the desert. Every item was chosen deliberately, every ounce calculated. Her destination was undisclosed, coordinates given only minutes before departure. A military helicopter awaited, engines humming like a predator in the night. Eli climbed aboard, seatbelt tight, mind racing. She could feel the weight of expectation pressing down, not just from those orchestrating this mission, but from herself. She had become the Wraith. Legends carry responsibility as heavily as they carry fear. The helicopter lifted off, slicing through pre-dawn shadows. Below, the desert faded into a mosaic of valleys, rivers, and urban landscapes. Eli's eyes scanned relentlessly, trained to notice the smallest anomaly. A misaligned radar dish, a flicker of heat where there should be none, the hum of engines hidden beneath the wind. This was no longer survival, it was anticipation. Every moment could be a pivot toward life or disaster. She reached the coordinates and disembarked into an abandoned airfield at the edge of a city. Lights flickered weakly, shadows stretching across cracked tarmac. Nothing moved openly, but every corner, every hangar could conceal threat or opportunity. Eli adjusted her jacket, checking the modified comm panel she carried like a lifeline. A voice came through her earpiece, distorted and unfamiliar. "Wraith, thank you for responding. There's no time for pleasantries. Civilian air traffic has been compromised. An unknown drone network is creating hazards over multiple flight corridors. We need your intervention. You will have access to live radar feeds, comms, and tactical support, but discretion is paramount. Do you understand?" Eli's eyes narrowed. "I understand. Coordinates." The voice gave precise waypoints, vectors, and altitudes. Eli memorized them instantly. Her mind, already trained to calculate trajectories under extreme stress, began to work in real time, scanning for the patterns in the incoming threats. She understood immediately. This was not a simple rogue drone or storm corridor. This was deliberate. Someone or some organization was testing airspace security, using automated drones to probe vulnerabilities. She moved into position, a lone pilot among shadows, her tools her weapons. The radar feeds flickered to life, streams of blips converging and diverging across the city skyline. Hundreds of drones, programmed for unpredictability, some acting in tandem, some autonomously. A single miscalculation could result in disaster. Eli's pulse was steady. Her hands moved with precision born of hours in deserts, in cockpits, against threats both mechanical and human. As she keyed in vector corrections and relayed commands through the comms, a sudden anomaly caught her attention, a drone diverging from its programmed path, heading toward a crowded corridor. Her fingers flew across the interface, adjusting altitude and speed parameters, redirecting it into an empty zone. Seconds later, a faint explosion marked its controlled neutralization. Eli exhaled sharply but did not relax. There were too many variables, too many unknowns, and the clock was relentless. Her focus was absolute. Hours seemed to compress into minutes as she monitored multiple feeds, predicted trajectories, and countered potential collisions. The Wraith moved unseen, invisible, yet her presence reshaped the battlefield. Pilots in cockpits miles away followed her silent guidance, adjusting altitude, vectors, and autopilot settings as if a spectral hand were steering them. Then came a message over an untraceable channel, chilling in its brevity. "You are noted, Wraith. Your skill is impressive, but exposure is dangerous. Be careful whose eyes follow you." Eli's heart skipped. The sender knew her code name. Someone in the shadows knew of her. She realized immediately. Her legend had attracted attention, not all of it friendly. Every calculation, every maneuver, every life saved had placed her under a lens she could not see. She tightened her jaw, determination flashing in her eyes. Fear could not dictate her actions. The Wraith was not a survivor of chance. She was a force of will, ingenuity, and courage. She would navigate this new danger as she had the desert, the storm, and the drones before. But she understood now that anonymity, her shield, had its limits. As the city skyline lit up with the early morning sun, she completed her first sweep, neutralizing errant drones, ensuring civilian air traffic remained safe. Her hands were blistered, muscles screaming, yet she could not pause. Her mind was already running through contingencies, anticipating the next wave of threats, calculating trajectories, predicting anomalies. Above, in the shadows of the skyline, a sleek aircraft passed undetected by civilians below. Eli noted the thermal signature instantly. A surveillance drone far larger than the others, its programming intelligent, almost human. She keyed in a rapid sequence of signals, diverting its path, disrupting its control without triggering a fail-safe. The drone veered harmlessly into a distant riverbed, neutralized. She exhaled, finally allowing herself a fraction of satisfaction. Hundreds of lives had been preserved once again. Yet, the note of caution from the unknown sender lingered like a shadow. She was now being watched. The Wraith had moved from legend to target. Every heroic action carried risk. and every calculation now had stakes beyond life and death. It carried consequences for the invisible network tracking her every move. Eli understood. The desert had forged her, the skis had tested her, and now the world beyond them would challenge her in ways no storm or drone ever could. She was the Wraith. She had become a guardian in the shadows. And she knew, with a pulse quickening despite exhaustion, that the true test of her legend was just beginning. As she prepared to leave the airfield, a new encrypted message arrived, stark and foreboding. Next phase imminent. Your abilities are required, but Wraith, beware the eyes you cannot see. Eli's jaw set. She looked up at the horizon where the sun was climbing, casting long light across the city. Her mind was racing, calculating, anticipating. The legend had grown, yes, but with growth came exposure, and with exposure came enemies she could not yet identify. The Wraith would rise. She would protect, navigate, and survive. But she also knew that the shadows now chasing her were as real as the ones she had faced in the desert, and somewhere unseen, they were waiting. The world had discovered the Wraith, and the Wraith was ready. The city slept uneasily beneath a fragile dawn. Skyscrapers reflected the first light of day, but shadows lingered, both literal and unseen. Major Eliza Harper, the Wraith, moved silently atop the roof of an abandoned hangar at the edge of the city, her modified comm panel strapped securely across her chest. The cold metal beneath her hands and the distant hum of the urban landscape grounded her, yet every nerve was alert. This was no longer about guiding commercial flights or neutralizing rogue drones. This was the reckoning, the moment when the Wraith would meet the eyes that had been watching her, silently, relentlessly, since the desert. Encrypted messages had traced a pattern over the last few days. Multiple surveillance drones, anomalous airspace intrusions, and encrypted transmissions. Someone somewhere had taken an interest in her. They had studied her, tracked her movements, and now she knew they would act. Eli's instincts were razor-sharp, honed by months of survival, improvisation, and high-stakes maneuvers. The Wraith was ready, but the stakes had never been higher. Her target emerged first as a shadow on radar, almost imperceptible, masked by the city's electromagnetic noise. A sleek, unmarked aircraft capable of evading conventional detection moved toward the air corridor she had secured. Eli's pulse surged. This was no ordinary adversary. Whoever piloted or programmed, this craft understood tactics, technology, and the limits of human reflex. They had been waiting for her. She activated the improvised comm system, linking into both civilian and military traffic channels. Every blip of light, every moving dot on her screens became a potential variable. Hundreds of lives were at stake, not just in the air but potentially on the ground. She inhaled deeply, the morning air dry and sharp against her lungs. Focus, precision, anticipation. She had survived the desert, survived storms, survived F-22 scrutiny. She would survive this. The aircraft moved with predatory efficiency, darting through city shadows, approaching the critical flight corridors. Eli calculated speed, vectors, and trajectories at lightning speed, her mind orchestrating a symphony of motion. Commercial flights adjusted under her guidance, autopilot commands executed seamlessly. But she knew the unknown adversary above was testing her limits, probing for weaknesses. Then a sudden signal appeared, encrypted, precise, unmistakable. The Wraith's name flashed across her panel, engage if necessary. It was both acknowledgement and threat. Whoever had orchestrated this challenge knew her identity now. They recognized the Wraith, understood her capabilities, and sought to draw her out. Eli pressed forward. Her fingers moved over the panel with calculated urgency, redirecting rogue drones into harmless zones, adjusting civilian flight altitudes, and feeding predictive data into the city's radar network. The unknown aircraft reacted instantly, recalculating, responding to her maneuvers as if anticipating them. The game had begun. Minutes stretched like hours. The city remained oblivious, civilians unaware of the invisible battle above their heads. Eli's body was fatigued, muscles trembling from repeated exertion, but her mind was sharper than ever. She anticipated every drone trajectory, every sudden maneuver, every anomaly. The Wraith had become a force not just reactive but predictive, a phantom guiding, manipulating, controlling the unseen battlefield. Then came the first visible strike. The aircraft released a swarm of micro-drones, autonomous and fast. Each one was a potential disaster. They converged on flight corridors, civilian infrastructure, and intersections where miscalculation could mean mass casualties. Eli's eyes narrowed. She keyed an array of signals, intercepting and diverting the micro-drones one by one, exploiting their AI limitations, and neutralizing them in mid-flight with minimal error. The adversary adapted immediately, introducing erratic flight patterns and electronic countermeasures. Eli's heart pounded, every calculation a knife-edge decision. She could feel the pressure of unseen observers, someone testing her, someone assessing whether the Wraith could survive in a scenario deliberately designed to overwhelm. Hours blurred. The sun rose higher, casting stark light over the city and revealing glimpses of the orchestrator's movements. A reflection here, a shadow there, tiny hints, yet enough for Eli to anticipate the next wave. She moved like a phantom, invisible yet decisive, guiding hundreds of moving targets, neutralizing threats, and outmaneuvering an enemy that sought to match her intellect and skill. Finally, the unknown aircraft revealed itself fully, a sleek black prototype unmarked, capable of rapid vertical ascents and unmatched speed. Eli understood instantly. This was no ordinary adversary. Whoever piloted it or controlled it remotely was elite, trained, and ruthless. And now they had escalated from probing to direct confrontation. She keyed in a final sequence, manipulating city radar grids, flight corridors, and micro-drone interception patterns to create a narrow corridor for engagement. The Wraith moved like a shadow, guiding the aircraft into a trap of predictive interception, not to destroy, but to neutralize and expose. The adversary reacted with precision, but Eli anticipated the movements, redirecting the course with near-psychic timing. The aircraft became ensnared in its own electronic countermeasures, forced into a controlled landing in an isolated industrial zone, neutralized without casualties. Eli exhaled sharply, the tension of hours flowing out of her in one long, shuddering release. The city below remained unaware, safe thanks to her vigilance, skill, and calm under pressure. But the Wraith had proven something greater than mere survival. She was untouchable in the shadows, lethal yet precise, legendary in both action and restraint. Then a final encrypted message appeared on her panel, calm, authoritative, yet tinged with grudging respect. Wraith extraordinary, you have passed the ultimate test. We know who you are. Your legend is secure, but remember, every shadow has eyes and every hero carries a price. Eli stared at the message, a mixture of satisfaction and solemn understanding washing over her. She had survived the desert, storms, drones, F-22 scrutiny, and now a direct, elite adversary. She had saved hundreds of lives, earned the respect of elite pilots, and cemented her place as a legend, the Wraith. Yet she also understood the cost. Recognition brought attention. Attention brought danger. And while she had proven herself in the skies, the world below was vast, unpredictable, and watching. The Wraith had become more than a pilot. She had become a force, a symbol, a phantom, a guardian who would be remembered not for her presence, but for the lives she saved and the shadows she navigated. Eli Harper leaned against the rooftop railing, staring at the rising sun over the city skyline. Her fingers brushed the comm panel, still warm from hours of exertion. She allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. She had faced death, uncertainty, and scrutiny, and emerged unbroken. She had become the Wraith, a legend in the air, a protector in the shadows, a name whispered with awe and respect among those who understood the stakes. The world may have seen her as Major Harper, lost and then miraculous, but she knew the truth. She was the Wraith, untouchable, unseen, and indomitable. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the shadows that watched, tested, and waited would have to reckon with her. because the Wraith had arrived, and the skis would never be the same again.